CAPSI podcast series, Conversations on African Philanthropy.
Welcome to Global Africa Conversations, brought to you by the Wits Business School Center for African Philanthropy and Social Investment. The Global Africa Conversation bring to you global African leaders from different professions, different walks of life, different interests. We have selected feminist leaders, political leaders, entrepreneurs, and NGO leaders who are working on matters of Africa's economic transformation, women's political leadership. This program is normally run by Professor Becky Moyo, who's currently on business leave, and I am standing in for him, and hopefully you will find the replacement half as competent as the main presenter. My name is Brian Tamuka Kagoro, and here we mix humor with seriousness, but we keep it real. Welcome to Global Africa Conversations. We're coming to you from Johannesburg. I'm joined by two amazing leaders. We're going to have a short conversation about building the power of women political leaders, what kind of ecosystems, infrastructure, and etc. But also talk about resourcing. They'll introduce themselves. Let me start with Bina. Who's Bina?
My name is Bina Maseno, a disruptor of patriarchy, but I also lead a team at Badili Africa, and at Badili Africa we turn unconventional spaces like salons, chamas, these are informal women cooperatives, digital platforms into civic classrooms. So that is where we carry out our political education, consciousness on issues that affect us. And we are also very, very keen on ending all forms of gender-based violence, both online and offline, as a very key deterrent to how women especially show up in public spaces.
And
my name is Chebb. I am a Pan-African feminist. I lead a collective, feminist collective called NalaFem, and we are supporting women political leaders to take charge, especially young women feminists, to be in office.
okay. So, to both of you, anyone can answer this question. Number one, what needs to be done in order to build the ecosystems, the institutions, the frameworks for women's political power?
Bina, you want to go? I think for me, there are three ingredients. It has to be feminist, it has to be Pan-African, and it has to be multi-generational. I think throughout history, we cracked the Pan-African part, the solidarity, the cross-border organizing. I think with technology and social media, millennials and Gen Z are also quite involved in that. The feminist component, women movements throughout the years have been at the forefront of it, but I think the multi-generational one is to crack, because today we have the average age of African leaders 64, and the average age of the population 20. And of course, the leadership is defined to an exclusive elite of certain age and gender, but you look deeper and you find the older woman, the more chance she can, get into politics. So we would need to really push for an intergenerational co-leadership model where young women are supported to lead. And on the question of resource to lead, I think we have to move beyond these intergenerational dialogues and move to something concrete. Are we going to actually put the progressive women in leadership? Do we have the policy and the protection that needs? A lot of young women, even in Kenya, and you could speak to it better than me, but the hostile environment of election is not even allowing women to have the courage to stand in politics. So I think political power would need a lot of multi-generation solidarity, because it is the other generation that we can look up to and say, if she could, I can too. And what the mistakes that they've done that we have to avoid, and what things that we have to carry forward and be a continuation of that struggle. So I think those are the three ingredients for me, but at the core of it, we have to be political. There is a lot of women in politics afraid to say, I'm a politician. And even if you're a political voice and you're not a politician, we have to stand and say, we're not afraid of politics. We have to be in politics, because every decision, every day is political.
Bina?
I'm going to add an agenda to that, but I think for me, I first want to say that we have to be very clear that influence is not just built in workshops, in boardrooms, but that influence lives in everyday spaces where women are already organizing. Women are already organizing in salons. Women are already organizing in chamas, in Stockwells, the Esusus, the Ebibinas. Young people are already organizing in the digital spaces, So we have unions, we have lawyers' unions, we have doctors' unions. And many a times I find that we are not very keen when it comes to building the critical mass to look at who is on the margins that needs to come to the table and understand this particular agenda, so that the work that we do is not just a reserve of people who work in civil society or people who call themselves activists or donors who fund activism, because sometimes, it feels like the work that we do, I need to speak up for us, but people need to understand that all of us need to be on the table. And so I find that many a times when we want to build political power, there are people who are connectors in the community, like I said, that we don't engage. They are connectors, they are gatekeepers, they are political actors, but we don't engage them. But also I want to say that when we look at political leadership, again, it's just not about running for office. You see, when we talk about the ecosystem, programming and resources often goes to support an individual. And we forget that an individual is not just a name on the ballot. An individual is a whole institution, you see. And you are as weak or as strong as the ecosystem that supports you, the infrastructure that supports you. And we haven't seen investments going into the infrastructure, because when you run for office, you're talking about your mobilizers, you're talking about your digital storytellers, you're talking about your security, you're talking about people who believe in you, you're talking about needing safe spaces where you can organize, where you can connect with people. And we don't program around that infrastructure, we just program around one particular individual, and I think that's where the gap is, especially for women, because majority of the men have had access to this machinery for so long. They've had political networks that back them, they have financiers that have backed them for a long time, and then now you want to have just one woman facing off with this patriarchal machinery, you see. So if we are very, very intentional about building women's political power, we have to invest in the whole ecosystem or infrastructure that is going to support the women, And also I'd like to add that let's just invest in pipelines and not just candidates. How do we continue building a continuous pipeline, supply of candidates? Because when you look at what happens in our communities, and when you look at what happens in the universities, majority of the young men, when you look at what is happening at the university space, majority of the young men who engage in student politics transition to national political spaces or policy spaces. But majority of the women who engage in campus politics do not transition to national politics. So then how do we leverage that particular space as a space where we are incubating the next young women who are coming up, so that we can see that transition from the university? I mean, it is rare to even find, like young women who are like, I want to run for the student presidency in our campus. Like if you look at the positions they run for, you're looking at gender secretary, sports secretary, accommodation secretary. But even the ones who are running for the student presidency, how do we still strengthen that ecosystem around them, and journey with them beyond the campus
the
gates
transition,
to Parliament. So I think also we have failed to be very, very intentional when it comes to building that supply chain.
I have to release you guys.
Yes,
right?
that's my cue to go, actually.
Yeah, I have to release you guys. Your final word?
No, on the funding, actually, I think we need to fund more Pan-African solidarity and Pan-African organizing, and we need to fund more movement to be built from within. There is a lot of trend in the donor space, funding results, funding the policy wins, funding the KPIs. But the movement cannot be sustained if we don't fund the health of the movement. In times of crisis, in times of just taking care of ourselves, in times of not only the election time. So there are a lot of movements that have won and died and have gone through turbulence because the funding is not sustainable for them to be healthy movement and to continue to do this work. And I think funding feminist collectives that are Pan-African, that are cross-border, a lot of the policies that is regressing us is very, it doesn't, it goes beyond borders. You find one policy in one country, you find moving around the continent to suppress women's rights, to push back on women's rights. But we don't find the same money going to defend democracy, to defend feminist leadership, to be in the places where feminist collectives are existing. So I think one is to fund the movement when there is no project, there is no outcome, there is no KPI, but also to fund cross-border solidarity, Pan-African feminist collectives.
I think for me, I would say, like, we have to resource these informal organizing spaces, because you see, if we don't even recognize them, then we miss out on building a critical mass that is supposed to push back against the injustices that we are seeing, against the poor governance that we are talking about. And when we talk about intergenerational core leadership, and I know Aya also touched on it, I think we must create a space where the younger people appreciate the experience and the networks the older people bring to the table, and then the older generation also appreciate the creativity and the imagination and the digital power that the young people also bring to the table. So we have to create spaces where we see each other and we are not just canceling each other out, oh, it's our time, but then how do we strengthen those spaces so that we can lead better together?
I have to let you go. I've already detained you longer than I intended. But thank you both for the quick chat. To be continued.
You've been listening to the CAPSI podcast series, Conversations on African Philanthropy.